Um, Okay, Patrick, we're ready to go? Okay. Welcome to the PTSA forum. Thank you to the PTSA for hosting this budget forum. We've got a very small public audience here, but hopefully a much larger public audience at home watching. And the PTSA, I'll let the PTSA kick off, and you are from the PTSA.
I'm actually from SEPTA.
But you're from SEPTA, okay.
I'm sorry, I'm Stephanie Hincady.
Stephanie, okay, yes, Stephanie. We've met before, but I think briefly. We know your daughter very well. But SEPTA and the PTSA have graciously put this together and organized it for really an opportunity for the public to get a better understanding of school budget, which is always a pretty complex topic. And with us is the administration that will help answer any questions. So we've got this is not online, right? This is just a agenda that we have here, but we'll walk through some, Dr. McCursey will welcome us and just introduce everyone. Then for those who maybe haven't had a chance to go through the budget in too much detail yet, we'll just go through an overview with some slides from the administration. And then there have been, I think, somewhere in the ballpark of 10 questions or so submitted. And here in our audience, Toby Linder might also have some extra questions. And then we'll have some closing comments. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Bill. Thank you.
Thanks. And Patrick's going to let me know if, can you hear me, Patrick? Over here. All right, so I'll stand off to the side. But can you hear me now? Can you see me? Okay. So welcome everybody, particularly those who are streaming in and those in the room. I want to thank PTSA and SEPTA for their leadership working with us on this forum. We wanted to provide really a final chance in person and also online for the Hastings community to really understand what's in this budget. And so we want to repeat, for those who have been following us day by day, there'll be some repeats here. I think it's important to really underscore some of the really essential points. There are some new communication pieces you'll see in this as we get into it. As Doug had said, we'll then move into talking about some submitted questions, and what, as we do in about every other month, we have the PTSA SEPTA forums online. We're going to follow that same format. So Stephanie, representing PTSA SEPTA, will ask us those questions, and we'll speak to those, and then we'll move into, if by the time we get to the in-the-room questions, maybe someone will be here and we'll do that. If not, we'll move into the wrap-up. This document, if it's not up yet on the website, will get it posted, and Melissa Del Barro is doing a wonderful job getting everything posted in a very designated part of the website. We appreciate that. And if you haven't found it yet, you go up to that top bar, and one item in, it says budget information. You click on that, it brings you right to the page with all the various pieces. So let me go forward. I think you know Melissa Szymanski, you know Maureen Carbello. We'll be the ones presenting, particularly Maureen and myself, and then as necessary on key questions, Melissa will step in. The overview, we want to do an overview, repeat the drivers. This is a significant increase. We all know that. We're being very open about this increase and the significance of it, and hopefully the drivers will help you understand why it's so essential that this is the amount that we brought to the board. We worked very hard with the board. We modified it down, but it still is an increase. We want to explain that, and there are some very important drivers that are leading to this. We want to also go into historic budget growth. This is not the largest budget that increase that's been recommended. We have others far beyond that, which we'll speak to. We then want to compare a bit to the region, look at the last 5 year, and then we do want to spend a little time on special education, because this budget really embraces special education, and we want to feature some parts of this budget that do that. A new piece, which you can look at very clearly online beyond here, and we thank members of the board, particularly Alex, for putting this, what I'm calling infographic, together. And literally in one place, this is the entire budget. So I could do this slide, be done, and we can go home. But we'll go further than that, because we're actually in this slide deck going to detail each of these parts. But you see here the increase of 5.68%. That's a significant increase. We know that. We're going to show that we're kind of in the middle of the pack with that increase. That's also, again, let me repeat, this is a factual comment, it's not the largest increase brought in Hastings, but it is significant. The tax levy's at 3.1%, but it actually leads to a decline in the tax rate of negative 1.75%. And we'll unpack that for you as we move ahead. The drivers, you keep hearing me talk about drivers, that's not people out on the road, those are factors affecting this budget. 75% is driven by three things. Very exciting in Hastings is three major changes to our facilities, our capital. The Hillside addition is about to come online. We think June 1 we'll have a ribbon cutting. We're finalizing that. It's a magnificent new space, essential needed. It's a cafeteria, which also can be performance space, added classrooms. I've been able to walk that space. Maureen, hats off to you. Hats off to the residents of Hastings for doing the heavy lift to make sure that happens. Renovation of a auditorium here in this building. I mean, I didn't know we had one upstairs. We've brought it back. Some new, but the old wonderful floor has been refinished. It'll seat, what, 250 people or so? Yeah. But that's an incredibly important investment, and the music suite in this building has been created to really provide a space for all of our music students to have a place to perform. The bond payment is now coming online for that. Many of us know districts in this region where the town, the village has not gone out to support a bond, not gone out for the necessary capital, and they're having trouble. Very wealthy districts not far from here, literally ceilings falling in, I am not joking. Or buildings having floods, send kids out during the year. Or buildings having to send their middle schoolers out during the year. So this is happening where communities, even wealthy ones, have not been willing to invest as necessary in the capital. So thank you, Hastings, for avoiding that, but this is part of what the drivers. Other drivers are special education, which we'll speak to in a little more detail, and also contractual increases. There are 4 or 5 other drivers, another 20% that's in the material we'll explain, but the bulk is that 75% that I've explained here. We have taken a number of actions detailed here to maintain keep our costs down as much as we can. We are adding no new programs. We'll talk about modifications in the special ed administration. That's an attempt to really advance the quality of programs, hear that first, quality of programs, and also look at any cost implications. BOCES participation is very, very important. I grew up a bit in the state, up in Ithaca, and I heard about BOCES then as a 12 to 15-year-old. Now as a professional, I really understand BOCES and understand the incredible value add it is for districts here in New York State. Far better than the services jointly provided in Connecticut, and Connecticut's not a bad state. Facilities and staff, there's efficiencies there, and as is also explained here, we're looking for efficiencies with busing, various positions, and a very important innovation, which you'd all care about, is bringing solar in. And then the bottom line here is really the bottom line. We have increased enrollment, more families bringing their children into Hastings. We believe we've got a very high value in our education. My Friday letters celebrate, and it's not hard to celebrate here. Every week I'm finding new things to celebrate, and I'm leaving things off the page just because there's so much great, good work going on. So now I'll hand it off to Maureen to go into more detail on all these things.
Okay.
Before we go there, guys,
Sure.
I just got a note from someone saying the slides are tough to see. I don't know. I don't think there's much we can do.
The aspect ratio is stretched a
It may have been that last
Maybe it was just that last
infographic.
slide,
Yes.
so.
Yeah, let's just see when we get to,
Yeah, it's,
They're all up online now?
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
so anyone
Thank you,
in the
Melissa.
viewing public who's having trouble seeing these slides, this deck is now posted online. So you can go there during this.
under the budget info, right? Is that what
Under
it
the
is?
budget info.
Okay. All right, so I will stand up now. Okay. So, we just felt it was important for those who may not have been able to watch some of our other presentations, just to, explain where our budget currently is in terms of our proposed budget that was adopted by the Board of Education. So as Bill had mentioned, again, this is just a bit of a breakdown of both the budget overview, and as you can see, we are proposing a budget-to-budget increase of 5.68%. With that, that required an increase in our tax levy, which is the portion of revenue related to property taxes of 3.1%. And because of some increase in assessment, and we can speak a little bit further about that as we go on, with the increase in the assessed valuation, the tax rate is actually showing a negative. But we've been pretty transparent saying that although that may be occurring because of the increase in the levy, some people may see a little bit more or less than that levy. So some of it is going to be based on individuals' their own assessed valuation of their home. But for the most part, it should be 3.1 or lower. Again, just a reminder of the breakdown of those drivers. Bill just went over them, so I'm not going to repeat all of them. But again, 75% of our budget is being driven by these top three expense items. One of which, again, is unique for this year, which is the new payment toward the debt. Which, in addition, I just want to also mention, in addition to 3 wonderful new spaces that were not only nice to have, but also part of a requirement, because there were many parts of our building, just as far as Hillside in particular, that were out of compliance, and that's not something we can just, kind of ignore. So some of it was out of necessity, but in addition to that, there was about $8 million, $7 million or so of infrastructure work also being done to it. So again, debt, although it is a lot when it first comes on, is necessary because we do have to maintain our buildings, and that is an important investment. And quite frankly, when you invest in bonds, then you don't have as much maintenance cost in your operational budget. So that's also an important piece to be thinking about. Although the dollars are large, they do also tend to help us with our operational budget, not having big needs to do maintenance projects. And then we'll get into a little bit more detail around the special education cost drivers, and we'll give you a little bit more detail around that, as there's a couple unique factors in there as well. And then again, the remaining costs, you can see them here. We have some increase in our bus services. Again, this is really based upon needs of students that are either attending out-of-district placements. The New York State retirement system, which we are required to pay into, they did need to increase the rate this year, and again, that cost is passed along to the district. And then some of these other items, no surprise here, we are seeing increases in both inflation, which is impacting all of our utility costs, and goods and services. And then there are some additional items that are new line items there, but again, just a relatively small portion of the overall increase. But you can see here the breakdown of those. We just again wanted, and we're just going to really just touch on this, and this goes back quite a while. But again, and this is in no way to be critical of past budgets, but just to kind of show there are ebbs and flows in district budgets. Some of it could have been enrollment driven. Some of it may have been driven by inflation, other, kind of expenses that there were upticks. But again, as you can see, we just kind of went back and tried to do about a 20-year snapshot really quick. And just in the left-hand column there, you'll see the budget to budget increases. And as you can see, this slide is hard to read. It's 0405, correct?
Yes.
So even going back to 0405, where we were seeing, fairly substantial double-digit increases in our budgets. And again, the accompanying tax increases during that time. And quite frankly, that there was a time of large growth. Again, some of it driven by enrollment, some of it just driven by spending decisions that at the time people either they wanted to see more programming brought into the district. But again, just to kind of give people a snapshot of just, the getting a larger picture of our budget growth over the years. And then again, as you can now see, as you come into some closer years, that there was a concerted effort at different points, knowing the budget was kind of getting much larger, and in years where we were able either to find efficiencies or make reductions, or there was just sometimes there's natural things that fall off the books, and we're able to keep our budget at a lower amount. But you can even see where in some years we were actually at a negative budget increase, and that those years too, and in the years where we can and make those reductions, we do, and those were good years. But I mean, you can see that again, we have sometimes been very high, and other times been at the very low end. And now really just taking a snapshot, oh, no, this isn't the most current year, sorry, it's hard for me to read this. But again, just going back over, and the tax cap compliance came in about 10 years ago or so. And then, like all budgets, but even prior to that, I think part of the reason I was thinking about it when I was putting this data in today is even prior to the tax cap legislation, we were below the tax cap. So, we've always, when we can, and we're trying to reduce costs and try to be as efficient as possible, we've always looked to try to balance our budgets with the needs of the community. And again, this is really now looking at the last 5 years. Again, although this year, as we've stated, is a larger increase than we've seen in the prior 5 years, you can kind of see though the years prior to the last two, we were pretty low, in terms of our budget to budget. And also when you have years where you're low, typically then there will be some upticks in just cost because we kept things so tight in those years. But again, looking at the last 5 years, you can see the average increase was less than 3%. And then again, the tax rate at actually a less than 1% over a 5-year period, and then a levy increase of an average of 3.49%. And that's kind of where we like to be in around that percentage.
Maureen, can you explain for
Sure.
people watching who might not really understand, how do you have a budget to budget that's lower than our current one, but the levy is higher? Can you explain to people use of reserves and how
Sure.
we've intentionally kept that lower so that even though we're budget to budget higher,
Mm-hmm.
the levy to the town is lower because we think they're one-time costs,
Correct.
not operational?
Right. So as Doug was mentioning, although our budget to budget is higher, because we do have reserves, and like as an example, this year we did have an uptick in our TRS costs. We're legally allowed to have reserves set up, so when there are spikes and variances in the rate, we're able to offset that with some revenues to kind of help soften the impact in those particular years. So we would put money toward kind of helping that like smooth the rate. And then there's also like with the debt, we appropriated some more fund balance this year, helping to kind of smooth some of that initial debt payment coming on. Being that debt payment will start to let off in 2 years, the thinking was to put some money, against it. And then again, there are occasionally one-offs, whether it be if we're working with a consultant and we, this is like a 1-year kind of deal, or we have a need to do some work with architects to update our 5-year plan, and that may be something we might offset some of that out of just a reserve because we know that's like a one-time, non-recurring expense, unlike staffing. So that's when we will look at the use of reserves and make a decision to kind of help offset the levy. But we have to be careful in doing that with recurring costs because then you can't duplicate that each year. So that's why you will see some variation between your budget to budget and your levy because it partially has to do with the revenue side and how either you have an increase in revenues like this year with the state aid plus the purposeful use of reserves. And we've been talking about this. Sure.
Can we just remind people, I just got another text
Yep.
where they can find the slides online.
Yes,
Anybody who might have come in late, sorry.
So it's under the budget info on the top tab, and then would it have today's date, Melissa? It'll be
What is it
dated
called?
May 11th, budget forum.
Oh, budget forum presentation.
Yes.
Okay, just so everybody, I just wanted to repeat.
No,
it
that's
one more time,
perfect.
Maybe a couple more times if people come in late, so,
Sure, that's great.
thanks, sorry.
Oh, no problem. And again, this was something we spoke about throughout our conversations on the budget this year. And again, it's just as, it's always important to kind of have a good understanding for all of us about what is the cost in the region, the regional cost to educate students. And again, it doesn't mean that we have to either be an exact number, but it is a way to gauge as we look at our overall budget and look at our enrollment. And this is just really a calculation of doing that. You take basically your overall budget, you look at your enrollment, and by dividing those numbers, you come up with a per pupil allocation. And this is just kind of a good indicator. So if you were to look at different people's budgets, you do have to take into account their enrollment to kind of have an understanding of, how are we doing in terms of our per pupil allocation and our costs in general in the region. So again, this is just to demonstrate that, and on the left, we're looking at a snapshot of the current fiscal year. And you can see where the box that's grayed out there, there's kind of like where the region is. And this is really Putnam Westchester district. So you can see that at the highest district in the region, that's I think $106,000 is their cost per educating a student. And that's, I know what district it is and I won't say who it is, but it is because they're a relatively small district, and because of that, similar to Hastings, smaller districts tend to have a little bit higher per pupil cost because they don't get the, they don't get that spread across the larger enrollments. But if you look at this graph, you can, clearly see that our district is right at that, really actually below the median for this year's spending per student. And again, then we do just to get a sense of it, not necessarily to fully compare, we do look at how we line up against our neighbors. Particularly on the left, we show the range in the river towns. And then again, on the right, we're kind of comparing, we're actually going a little bit further than the river towns and looking at some of our regional neighbors. And you can see this proposed budget, even with the increase in the debt payment, our average per student allocations at 33,831, and that's kind of comparing against 35 with our neighbors. So again, just another data point to kind of give people a sense of our overall spending. This is something, I'm not going to necessarily get into the full details here. We've spoken about this at different times when we're contemplating our budget, and it's important because I think as the board and the administration considers our upcoming spending plan or upcoming budget, we always have to think about the out years. If you can, you have to understand what you can support, what you can sustain over the long term. And although there may be things sometimes we would either like to add, we have to consider, the budget growth over the 5-year term. So again, this is just a kind of a graph, and basically what it is doing is there's some fixed costs we know of, there's some, we don't know everything that's gonna happen year to year, so of course there's gonna be variations in these numbers, but it really is just kind of demonstrating, just without doing, adding anything, just, the way our costs grow. 80% of our budget is staff and salaries, as is every school district. And, everyone has a contract, and as we all know, health costs and different benefit costs typically go up year over year. So just by virtue of, those, each year, those costs going up, you can kind of see the impact on the budget. So although it may seem like a lot, about $1 million, but basically those costs grow by $1 million each year. And legally, with the tax cap, most years we only have $800,000 additional money we can fund, depending on the formula in a given year. So again, it's something, as we contemplated this year's budget, we try to find efficiencies where we could. There were some costs that were growing, and it kind of gives you a snapshot of where we think we may be in the next few years. And as you can see, the chart shows because of the because of the debt, there was an uptick. And then looking at the next future years, we would be trending closer to that 3% and 4%, because then that debt starts to level off. So, because our year-over-year costs are pretty much at that 3% mark, 3 to 4. And similar, looking at the revenue side, and this is also important. We project out where we think our state revenues will be and some other numbers, and again, we show some growth over the years, but just to kind of show you where funding gaps, when you are, the cap is fairly restrictive, and as we look in each year has been a struggle really since that tax cap has been in place. I mean, you can see that in next year's 23-24, we would only be have allowable cap of maybe 800,000 or 900,000, and as we stated earlier, our salaries grow by more than that each year. And again, this is every district. This is not unique to Hastings. This isn't because we either overpay our teachers. It's just the reality of the costs in this region and the cost drivers. So, each year's budget is fairly challenging, So just to kind of give you a snapshot, and, just understand that in our process, these are all things that we contemplate. We look at current year as well as future. Bill, do you want me to go? You're going to go through this? Okay.
Thanks, Maureen.
Sure.
So just a little bit more, and then we'll get into the questions. But budget's about numbers, but the core is it's about meaning the key story in a budget. You want to look for what the several stories are. The key story in this budget is that we're right in the mix in terms of growth. One thing we haven't touched on here, but it's in the Q&A online. So again, if you're tying in now not in the room, and you're trying to find this presentation, go to the main website, go to the top bar, one in, says budget information, click on that, and then look for a PowerPoint that would say Budget Forum 5/11/22, and you'll get to all these slides and all the detail. Story so far is that we're right in the mix with all the other districts around us. And in the FAQ that is up on that website, question 10, thank you board members for doing this research, you'll see there in terms of percent growth, full transparency, right in the middle of the pack. So there's some larger than us in growth, greater rates, and there's some less than us, but we show all of that. So story one is, this is a budget maintaining the excellence in Hastings and making sure we do that. Story two is, we're in a time of increasing costs all over, and that's part of what's happening for us. Story three, we have an uncommon driver in the bond, but that's really good news because we need quality facilities that are safe, sound, and allow for high quality programming. So that's story three. Story four is special education. We, across the nation, are because of the increasing complexity of needs of students, and special ed is an individual by individual by individual approach. Gen Ed, you can budget by groups. You can budget by groups. Special ed, you budget by each individual student. So with the some 250 or so identified students we have in Hastings, there's individual budget decisions related to all of them in terms of their needs. That's a moral obligation, it's an ethical obligation, and because of 20, 30 years of history of districts not doing it right, it's also a legal obligation. There are federal and state laws to protect the rights of those identified within special education. So what we've done in this budget is say, how do we embrace at a high quality level special education? How do we acknowledge we need to do a better job? Excellent staff, excellent teachers, very strong director, very strong assistant director. But we've seen a way to say, let's, over the next several years, make sure we're that much stronger. And so I want to emphasize parts of that. On this slide, if you've already read it at home or here, you see our commitment. You see immediate steps this coming year we want to work on to foster that commitment, and I'll get to that in a second in terms of some modifications in administration and staffing that actually are being done at a very cost-effective level. But then, in a collective way, looking to the future through an internal, meaning just us within Hastings, program review as to what we're doing. A lot of discussion about that we are proposing to add a second assistant director. This would be uncommon amongst many of the districts our size, but if we get in a little bit, we'll talk about the proportion of our students within special ed, the proportion of our budget within special ed, and as we're going to share in a second, we're actually able to do this year with the savings. And as I'm quoted in the newsletter on the budget, it's counterintuitive that you add an administrator, we actually save money. We're able to do that at this point. And as much as the need is here for this position, if we hadn't been able to save money, I don't think we would have recommended it to the board, and I'm quite sure the board wouldn't have adopted it. But as there's a wider range of work required to let us support the families that are identified within special ed, and there's online detailed examples of about 3 pages of PowerPoint detail on the work required to manage the relationships and the technical aspects of special ed correctly. And so no added cost to bolster our ability to manage those relationships. So hear me say relationships and that technical work with families, we're saying let's add a second assistant director at this point. We are folding in the inclusion management work, actually emphasizing how important that is by bringing that right into the management function. We will continue our SPED coordinators. There have been some talk about not continuing those, but we will continue that. The SPED department chair, we will discontinue. That's part of the way we can get some savings and apply that over to the assistant director. And we are able to find some quality efficiencies that relates to our teacher aides and assistants. Not going to read this whole slide to you, don't worry. It's online. But this talks about the 5 sort of organizing points about why it's so important to have this strength at the director and assistant director level, but add that assistant director. The headline's not to read it to you, but it's to manage those relationships. It's to supervise and coach our existing staff that much better. We have really, really good people, but they are looking for more guidance and support. Communication with families, communication within the district, strategic planning, and as we're seeing nationwide, COVID-19, which hasn't gone away, but that intensity that kept us out of school, that's at a residual. And particularly in the special ed community and those students, there's been a more significant residual as the effects of that time out of school. Now, Hastings was one of the rare districts that had special ed students in district. Still, there's a residual there that requires attention. Financial model here is very clear. We are able to save money by making this move, by the absorption of those positions that are listed here, and some good, smart application of federal grant funds for the coming year. I think it's about a $30,000 savings, is that correct? $30,000 savings with this. The other part of what we want to do, as I'd mentioned, and this is really the strategic part, so the staffing adjustments, that's next year. That's making changes right away. The other thing we want to do is, over the last 5-6 years, there have been two major external reviews of special education in Hastings. Some of that work's been followed up on, some of it hasn't. Part of that's due to leadership transitions in the superintendent seat, frankly. And as I interviewed for this position, the board was really making sure I was very serious about special education. As I got here, it was clear I had to be very serious about special education, and it'd be quite natural for a new leader to say, well, let's get someone here to evaluate it. Let's get someone here to study it. But it became clear that that would have been a mistake in Hastings, given there had already been two strong external reviews, and we need to really look at that closely. So what we'll be doing, and the commitments to and the guiding priorities for this review are there, but we want to establish a committee, internal, with parents, also the key professionals in the district, some external leavening if necessary, to go through particularly the Katzman and including schooling reports. Those are the two I referred to. What can we learn from those? What can we bring in? We already know that those two reports, particularly Katzman, have recommended additional management structure, additional management oversight. So part of what we're doing is to say at no cost we can add that assistant director, because our very strong hunch is next year we'll be saying we need to add more administrative support. But these are the parts of what will go on in that review. The intended outcomes is a prioritization of recommendations, develop an action plan with deliverables, timelines, and have this before the board and the community as of January 2023. So the timeline on that is tight. Not up here, but related is we're bringing to the board a recommended external partner for the portrait of the Hastings learner. There's been some talk the last several weeks about why would a district get into that. Well, the reality is the state-of-the-art, the best districts, they get into looking strategically. They get into strategic planning. We're not calling that. We're calling it a portrait of Hastings learner. And I can just list to you 9 districts in the tri-state area that have worked on a portrait process, developing a vision, and that we'd be doing, and we've identified an external partner we'll be bringing to the board on May 23rd with a recommendation, who has worked in the following districts: Ossining, Edgemont, Westport in Connecticut, Pelham, North Shore Public Schools, Mount Pleasant, Harbor Fields, Haverford, Cherry Hill Public Schools, just to name a sample. And you can go around the country to see those districts that have clear vision and sense of things have gone through that process. We also know this will not be actually that much money. It'll be about $25,000 to do this process. And so right now, if you said don't fund that, that's not going to solve that $3 million increase. If you took the assistant director out, which is a savings, that's not solving that $3 million increase problem. We actually think with good planning on the special ed side and good planning on the portrait of a Hastings learner side, and we were very, as the administration, pleased with who we're about to recommend, who's got a lot of experience in this area, that we think this will give us a leg up. Go back to those detailed charts about the projections financially. We'll have a leg up on staying as close to that anticipated growth as possible that Maureen has shared in those future years. The SPED drivers are here. You can look at those. It's about a $500,000 increase, about 5.9%, 6%. It's spelled out. A large one, a large portion of that is $125,000 that we're obligated to provide for students at Hudson Lab School. That's part of the New York State requirements that we have to meet, and the other pieces are there. Out of district is significant for us in Hastings. Some of that is parent decisions on placement. Some of that are where it's the best match for a family to be out of district. But those are significant costs. I'm not going to go line by line, don't worry, but we've put here in the slide deck for you again, as a community, what are our rates and cost rates within special ed, what the classification rate is, and you can see that in the far right column. What's very important to see is that now going into next year, it's anticipated we'll have about 15% of our students identified within special ed. I insist that we embrace every one of those children, those students, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to be working with students of full range and background. That requires us to be very well organized. And now as you move ahead, just because of the needs, we budget again individually in this regard. The proportion of the budget that's required, you can see has been upwards of 19%, and going into this coming year as much as 22%. That's all based on individual needs. So you never want to start a conversation in special ed around dollars. You do have to have that as part of what we're thinking. And these are all dollars that are needed for those children, and we want to make sure they're used optimally. So we're now at questions and discussion. It may make sense to go to those that were submitted ahead of time online. Again, thank you PTSA SEPTA, thank you Stephanie, thank you Kafir who's listening, thank you Carrie Jew for listening, and thank you Jen Destin. We hope you're doing well, and we'll now field the questions.
Okay, great. Well, the questions that were submitted in advance were in 4 general areas, and I think it makes the most sense to start with special ed since you just finished that one. And I actually think you covered most of the topics, but I want to make sure to hit 2 points in particular. One was that the emphasis with the Assistant Director of Special Education wanted to make sure that there was an emphasis on coaching for general ed teachers to truly differentiate curriculum, and with a focus on all grades, especially middle and high school. So if you could address those elements.
Sure, I'm happy to. So again, I just wanted to reiterate what Bill had said about additional information regarding the second Assistant Director of Special Ed. And that can be found, there is that detailed PowerPoint with the budget presentation on March 7th. So if anyone needs some additional information, that's all front and center there. So again, just high level, that slide that was displayed earlier, that one of the reasons, one of the proposed administration and staff modifications was the addition of the second assistant director. And this is really to bolster the strong work of the current administrators regarding 5 specific areas. So that's strategic planning and implementation, management of essential family, student, and staff processes, staff supervision and coaching, which is the piece that you were just referring to, communication, and COVID-19 impact response. So coaching is not something that is unique to any one particular position, whether it be a faculty-related position with someone on a classroom line or an administrative position. Coaching is something that is inherently good across many different roles. And so from a leadership perspective, that is something that can continue to happen. So coaching is basically, you can have it manifest in different forms. So it can be cycles, so there can be people that are identified that go through different cycles of coaching, and those can shift over the course of the year. Our inclusion facilitator has been doing some coaching this year, and again, that role is going to be returning back into the classroom. But that does not mean that coaching can't be continuing. And I do know that that was something, in terms of differentiating curriculum. The coaching piece is specific to the individual person being coached to build capacity and enhance bright spots that are happening that then turns into work that's instructional and meets the needs of all students. Differentiation can happen through a variety of different avenues, and instruction around that can happen through a variety of different avenues. It does not only have to be through coaching cycles. So there can be direct professional learning on differentiated instruction, which we did start with Tracy Tyler in the middle school, who was a thought partner with us and helped to work to facilitate that. It can happen across general education and special education. And actually what we brought in with the STAR screener, for example, the diagnostic screener in grades K through 8 is another avenue to leverage in terms of coaching. So it gives baseline information, it gives specific pointers around where a student is at any given point in time. And then it's again working with colleagues if you're a teacher, or working with an administrator if you are receiving feedback. It's part of the planning process where you take a look at the data and you say, how can I best meet the needs of my students? And our teachers do very naturally do that through conversations that they're happening. And there have been, even through the use of this diagnostic screener, more concerted opportunities to review data, to look across, to find some patterns, and to think about how we can shift instruction and what students need in terms of not only instructional modalities, but what resources might be helpful. So I hope I spoke a little bit more to that. So it's not an either or. So, not only is there a cost savings to the district to bring in a second assistant director of special education for next year, it would address those different areas, those bullets that I mentioned, and differentiated instruction and coaching, which are two separate things. Like one can be an avenue to the other, but not the only avenue, can sit alongside. So it is not an either or.
Okay, thank you. And the other question related to special education was about the confusion about how there could be an additional non-instructional position with the assistant director of special education, and still have a cost savings. But I think that has been covered and it's in the slides. If there's any other elements you want to clarify too.
Do you want to talk about funding?
Yeah, can you hear me, Patrick? Yeah, I guess I've never been accused of having a small voice.
You don't need this.
Yeah. No, just to repeat, because it's really important, and that's why we've really emphasized this in a variety of places, it's counterintuitive. It's almost, gosh, how do you add a position and save money? Well, it's because we've been very thoughtful, and it started with Lauren Tesfa. They were saying, that's our director of SPED and our assistant director of SPED, saying there are different ways we can deploy our personnel to maximize what we're doing. And that also relates to the classroom adjustments we're going to make to our assistants. We're still going to have those ICT classrooms. Those are still central to what we do here in Hastings. We're just modifying the degree of adults in the room. You're still going to have 2 full-time adults in those rooms, full-time SPED teacher, full-time gen ed teacher, and then shared amongst 2 classrooms will still be that teacher assistant. So that's another efficiency we've talked about. We think it's a quality move. But what we're able to do with that assistant director is those modification of those 2 other positions plus the grant money, and thus save money into this next year.
Can
Yeah, please.
this is more just a comment. So I know, and we, as I had mentioned before, we do look around at our regional partners to see how different districts do things differently. But in terms of, I know there's been some concern about, well, this so-and-so district doesn't have X or Y. But quite frankly, many districts have things that we don't have, and we may have things that they don't have. I think we look at what our needs currently are at the district, where we think we need to put our highest level of focus, and that's how we determine the needs. And each district may have different students with different needs, and we believed in this year, and partially we were able to do it with the existing staff members, but as an example, we're the only district that doesn't have a director of technology. I'm not saying that to advocate for it, I'm just saying there are different administrative structures out there, and based upon how we are structured, this is the recommendation. So I think just to say that is 100% true, that I don't believe there may be districts locally that in our neighboring districts that may have, but they may have other titles or other type of staff, and people just deploy their resources differently. And I think we're just really taking an existing role and shifting it. And yes, in fact, it has an administrative title, but it's just really a shift, and that we're able to accomplish that. And it is a little less expensive for us, but it is also just a need in the district.
Yeah, and let me anticipate a question, if I may, which is, okay, well, why not get a behavioral specialist? Why not get a specialist in dyslexia? Why not go right into some core needs? Well, let's tie that then to that program review. One, we'd have to go out and spend more money to do that, but let's get through the program review to really identify what's that range of needs here in Hastings that will help us identify how best to optimize the match between what our children need in district and the resources needed.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about the overall budget size. The budget summary document says the district has an allowable increase of up to $2 million, but the proposed 2022-23 budget is increasing by about $3 million. Can this please be explained?
Sure. So the reference to the $2 million is speaking specifically about the allowable tax, property tax, allowable limit under the tax cap. So I had mentioned, which is, I know, a lot of words, but each year, we can always levy more, but there's a calculation that we're given by the state that tells us what our allowable increase to our property tax line in our revenue can be and still be considered tax cap compliant. And it's unique to each district. It's a combination of some exclusions you're allowed to have, the CPI. By using that formula this year, we could have levied $2 million. Currently, to support the budget increase of $3 million, we are proposing a levy increase of $1.3 million. So what we were suggesting here is, although under state law, that levy could have been up to $2 million, we are now actually proposing a budget that is underneath that allowable increase in terms of property tax increase. As we had mentioned earlier, how are we accomplishing that? We have some additional revenues that we are seeing from the state. We are also seeing some local sales tax increases in revenue and as well as appropriating more money out of our rainy day funds, our reserves, to help keep that dollar amount lower. So that's kind of what we were referring to. So when we say we're allowed to levy, we're speaking specifically about the property taxes, not about the overall budget increase. So I don't know if it's a little confusing, but.
I think that's great, thank
Okay.
you. Okay, the next section of our type of question was related to retirements. And there are several questions. So the budget FAQ states there will be 3 full-time equivalent retirements that will not be replaced in the 2022-2023 school year. First question is a yes or no. Are these all teaching positions?
So we have, can I go beyond a yes?
Or maybe not a yes or no.
Yes, so yes, we have 3 teachers actually. So one is a communications class, one is 5th grade, one is 1st grade. These are based on enrollment and sectioning. They are based on enrollment. So it sits within the case expanded is 3 teachers.
Okay,
High school English.
Those are all being replaced. They're all being hired for. Yeah, so that's not happening in terms of the English, the high school English, because there was a bit of chatter about that and wondering, those are all being hired for. So those retirements are being replaced.
okay, so then what departments are these positions in? I think you just answered that.
That's
Do you
right.
want to reiterate again?
Sure,
just to-
it's a communications class, 5th grade and 1st grade. And we're keeping an eye on that. So in terms of enrollments, if that should shift, we want to make sure that we're optimizing where those go. Where somebody retires doesn't necessarily mean that's where the gap is. So people are hired in different types of areas. So for example, if you're a special education teacher and you are in an ICT class and you've retired, staffing can always shift. So the actual place where the position will no longer exist is the communications class. So that's just an example. They're
Okay.
all seated K-6.
All right, that's great, because that goes into the next question, which is, will there be reductions in course offerings as a result of the retirements? For example, fewer electives?
So there won't be fewer electives. There will be a couple of different electives, and I'll explain why. So Mr. Marciano at the high school level he teaches theater arts and 60s culture, And that is something that he has, both of those, he has specific expertise in. So they do not leave the elective pool. So those are still remaining in the core group of electives. The electives rotate over time in terms of what's being offered. But to give an example, there's a new offering, Building a Better Bookshelf, Literacy in the 21st Century. That was developed from discussions with Janice Mateo Toledo about opportunities to enhance access to culturally responsive texts. And so that particular class is also intended to elevate student choice and voice in what students are reading. So they'll have the opportunity to weigh in and really look across different genres too. And then the second is Speak for Yourself, the Art of Communication, and that's designed to support students with the skill of communication, including public speaking. So those are being added to the elective pool, and next year, the other two that I mentioned are coming out in terms of the offerings. They're still there long term, but no, there isn't a decrease in the actual number of electives being offered.
Okay, thank you. And the last question about this is, what about resignations and other non-retirement vacancies?
So in terms of Latin, we've already filled. French has been posted, so we're still hiring. The other vacancies, we're replacing, and anything else, we're posting for them. We're trying our best to hire for them. And of course, should enrollment change, we would look at that, but there is no intention of shifting anything else at this time.
Okay.
And I was not helping by speaking a little while you were asking that question. So
What about resignations and other non-retirement vacancies?
Same.
Same.
Yeah, same.
So-
We're replacing them. It's just the three that I mentioned.
The teacher assistant.
Oh, yes, okay, and Bill did, so I'll go a little bit more in depth. So we have recommended some shifts to the ICT, specifically in grades 2 through 5. So the ICT classes will have a 0.5 instead of a 1.0 teaching assistant. And the grades are going to be working collaboratively to split the time to best meet students' needs, so they'll work together to figure out when the actual staffing. And a primary reason for this change is actually developmental. So thinking about students that are growing through the system, making sure that we're increasing their independence. A TA is not, it's not required in an ICT class. And actually, in addition to the independence and agency that we're going for, we've actually currently have had to be using our teaching assistants and deploy them for other staffing purposes. And those are the grades typically in which that happens. And so thinking about need, rather than covering teacher absences and providing some of those building-based coverages, we wanted to make sure that we were optimizing how we were using people, where we were using people, and then certainly at the core thinking about student independence and agency as they're aging up through the system.
All right, thank you. So the final section was about the contingency budget. And I apologize to anyone who submitted questions, and if I didn't, I am the one who tried to tie them all into succinct questions. So the main headline is, what is at risk if the budget is not approved by voters?
Well, I just want to first explain what happens when a budget gets voted down, because there's, the board is allowed to do two, I would say like three things. So either they can put up the exact same budget for a second vote. They could potentially modify the budget and put it up for a second vote, or you could go right to a contingency budget, like right from there. And a contingency budget is a budget that does not allow you to increase your tax levy from the previous year. And as we had mentioned, our current increase to our tax levy is proposed to be 1.3 million. So if you're not, you would have to actually make those corresponding reductions in the budget. If we chose to go with the first two options, or there was a decision made to go with either presenting the same budget for a second vote, maybe the thinking would be like, we just need to explain better, more what's included in this budget, or put up a modification budget. If that budget were to go down, you're automatically at a contingency budget. And again, as I mentioned, we know what the dollars are for us, because that we're not allowed to increase the levy. And quite frankly, we don't have the money in the reserves to just kind of, balance the budget. It would require reductions to staffing and program, because we talked about earlier, 80% of our budget is that cost. So even if we took off a few, as Bill had mentioned, a contract here or a contract there, in order to really, get into that type of savings, it would require a good amount of reduction. So that's what occurs if a budget's voted down.
Let me play superintendent, and let me play veteran superintendent. I've been lucky the last 9 years to work in wonderfully well-resourced communities, and Hastings is one of those. And in the well-resourced communities, heavily all of them depend on property taxes as the source. At this time of year, great concern about any increase. And so I've unfortunately had to been in this discussion at least the last 9 years. And then prior to that, in the Archdiocese of Boston, where I was, we were going around closing schools, closing parishes. So too much of my career has been having to rein in costs. Yeah, it's me. Rein in costs. And so I think what's really important here is for the residents to look at this as multi-year. This is a larger number than any of us want right now, but we need every penny of it. And I'll give you some examples why in a second, and it ties to the experiences of the last several years, not just in Hastings. We need every single penny, but take the long view, because we've been able in Hastings, thanks to the great work of the board, the village, the two people you see here, particularly Maureen, who's been at this, it seems forever, to find efficiencies when we need them. And you've seen the projections now out over the next several years. New York State requires that. Some other states don't. So that's a plus for residents of Hastings, that we are forced to look out 5 years. Other places don't do that. So you can get a sense of where we may be. If the, it's full right as to how people want to vote. So but here are the facts. Back on March 21, we brought to the board at the board's request, and they said, please put on it not recommended, because I have lived in other districts bringing forward lists like this, and it immediately rocks in the organization. Because at this point, needing every penny, the things we would have to talk about to get to about 2.4 million in reductions, and that's about $1 million more than just the contingency would be, right. We would be talking about class sizes. 70 fourth grade parents came forward and says, when we come into fifth grade, we want the same class size we had in fourth grade. I totally understand it. As an educator and a parent, I totally understand it. Hastings at fifth grade has had they're good class sizes. There's good instruction going on. It's a longer conversation in Hastings, because the rising fifth graders will come into the exact same size classes as the current fifth grade. Correct. But having said that, given 70 people signed a petition, and I respect and honor all of that, one of the places we would go right away is bigger classes. We would have to go to bigger classes. That would get us about $400,000 just to get up 26 students per class. I've mentioned the importance of ICT. We would have to go to look at ICT. Can we do as much ICT here in Hastings? We do more than many of the districts around us. That's 900,000. These are real cuts to the quality of what goes on in Hastings. We would also then look at sixth grade, 6-12 up, any class size less than 15. You talked about electives, we would cut those, because that's the only way you start to get the kind of money out of the budget to get to have it line up with the contingency. In district busing, I don't know how you would do that. I enjoy standing one morning a week up at Hillside, and I enjoy standing outside of the high school one morning a week and the multiple doors at the middle school, so I visualize this. I don't know how you would do this in the traffic of Hastings by taking away busing, but that would be another place we would go. Then you get into the things that are always put up, music, modified sports, but this is how serious it is. So the board, in its good wisdom, said back in late March, give us ideas, don't call them recommendations, give us ideas of what that would be. Even that, though, in this building, within a couple days, the word was, oh, you're cutting this, you're cutting that, you're cutting this. No. It was a thought experiment, if you will, by the board to get ahead of this question. So residents of Hastings need to know that, take the long view. This money we need every penny of, because to not pass this, again, your choice to how you vote, but if not pass this would put us into some very serious waters. And we're saying as a leadership team, let us get this budget through, and then let's work really hard over the next several years to get that growth rate back down to a level that makes sense to all of us. And that's the pretty direct answer.
Okay, so just to reiterate, the person who submitted it had listed out all where those areas would be, and I think you cut them or touched all of them. Higher class sizes. One question was about athletic coaches, club advisors, transportation, et cetera. Those would all be impacted.
Potentially. I mean, and this is all done in public. The board is elected, they do all their business in public, so these would be public discussions. And I can assure you, those are not going to be fun discussions, because I've lived this. I just have lived this. So the other thing is, if anyone is concerned about the new superintendent in 5.6, I understand that this is not the number we need to have going forward. And that just my record is, how do you maintain high quality, but have that as efficient as possible? And that's the next several years. How do we get there?
Okay, great. Well, those were the questions that were submitted online. Someone did email me that they were having trouble accessing the slides, so can you say again where the slides are?
Oh, sorry, they're on our website under the budget info tab, and they're labeled Budget Forum, so they should be able to access it there.
Okay. And then if anyone in the audience here wants to ask any questions, oh wait, I'm sorry, I just got another question. Oh, no, thank you. Someone's saying I did a good job. If anyone here in the audience wants to ask a question, we're limiting it to 3 minutes, and I will set a timer on my phone, so it's not me cutting you off.
Oh, can I just say one last comment
Sure.
about the contingency budget? Just also, just recognize the timing, because there is a requirement to have, Melissa and I were talking, I think it's toward the end of June, like June 21st, it's like a legal date. You have to, have your other vote if you were to have it. So basically, because you have to publicize what those numbers are, the decisions around what that would include would have to be done no later than like the end of May. Like you would have to know what that new budget is. So that is like, things would have to be turned around. Like it wouldn't allow for maybe, months of discussion. It would be pretty much 2 weeks. That's all.
And thanks to us going online to get you to the slides, when you click on it, there's a beautiful color flyer for this program. Thank you, PTSA SEPTA. Right below that, it says 2022-23 budget. Right below that, in almost circus level is font, is budget form presentation 11-2022. So you click right on that, and it will get you to the document we presented tonight.
It's in the middle, not on the sidebar.
In the middle.
Can we project that on the screen, maybe?
That's the problem, I can't see on the screen.
Got it.
We should probably, Melissa, put it on the side nav too, so do both places, because I think I've gone to look there and now realize where it is. I just had a couple final thoughts. First, I want to say as a first-year superintendent coming in for one of the larger budget increases that we've had, I know that's difficult.
Sorry.
And I want to underscore as the board president that this was not Dr. McCursey's kind of MO to come in here and figure out how to be a big spender. That is not what his MO was at all. It was a very long-term view. He happened to take over as superintendent at a time structurally where different things were happening. The bond was coming online, the biggest thing, and a variety of other things that have been gone through in this presentation. So I just want to say, thank you for the work that you've been doing and for the whole team that you've been doing in putting this budget together. There's a lot in a budget like this, and I'd recommend anyone listening, if you haven't gone online, to really read through all the materials that you can. And if you have questions, email boe@hohschools.org. We'll answer everyone we can get to. We've been doing that since really early March. Have been getting a lot of questions. You see some online, you see some maybe at meetings, but we get a fair amount online. We've been answering all of those questions. So please don't make a not understanding the budget a reason for not voting. Wherever you vote, please be as informed as you can and send us questions. And most important, May 17, Cochrane, get out and vote. That is the most important thing. We've got 2 candidates running for the Board of Ed for 2 seats. Sometimes when there's not a contested election, there may be a smaller turnout at the polls. Please come to the polls anyways. Please get out and support this vote. And anyone who's been here just for the last 3 years know that votes can be decided on very thin margins. We've had a recent vote on to use capital reserve funds, which we actually didn't end up using, but the vote did pass by only 7 people. 7 people is a straight majority. 7 people passed that vote. So please get out and vote if you, any way you can on May 17. That's really the most important thing. So thank you to the administration for all the time and energy in putting this together. Thank you to SEPTA, PTSA, and for our audience member in person, and to the audience watching. Please reach out and get out and vote. So thank you.
Yep, thank you.